Today's session is how to apply a web security testing guide, because we have seen that there's so much of resource available on the internet, but what is the relevant one for us? And especially there are a lot of people who ask how to get started with the pen testing, how to get started with the web security testing. So when I was introduced to OWASP, it was not the community, it was the web security testing guide, which was like a long time back. But that time, my assumption was that there is only OWASP security testing guide, and that's all. I didn't know that there's a huge community of researcher out there. Slowly and steadily, I started getting involved in the community. Now, moving on to the topic, how this can be useful, or how this testing guide can be useful for people starting off with security specialist, or the people who are getting started with security. So we can use this guide in combination with other techniques that we know, or we can just get started with it because it has a framework. The guide talks about the basics, especially what are robots, .txt file, or how to do the information gathering. And there is so much detail out there. It's not just that you straight jump into pen testing, but then it talks about basics. It talks about clearing all those untouched points which needs to be considered. Similarly, for software testers or QAs, we can use this guide as the set of test cases which may be applying to which maybe we be applying to the applications. So we can catch those vulnerabilities, identify those vulnerability early, and save consider considering the amount of time that we generally spend in fixing it after the security team provides us. So now here we can find it early because we know, okay, this is the thing that we should be testing, at least to a considerable uh, amount of time that we can save here. Now, how about developers? Can they use it? Absolutely. Why not? So, for developers, these tests can be used as part of the normal code and unit testing procedures because the guide talks about multiple details like what could go wrong if we don't if we have this vulnerability. What is the impact? How can we fix it? So it talks about all those areas. And for project managers as well, they can consider this for the reason that this guide exists and security issues also exist. So it can give a brief idea to the project managers as well because they talk day in and day out about security, if they are security project managers. And if they don't have if they don't get the understanding, it's sometimes really challenging. So this guide really helps. I've seen my friends who are project managers, they have got really benefited by using the testing guide. Now, when we talk about testing, what kind of testings do we have? We have a passive testing. Like we can categorize in multiple ways, but I generally say that it can be passive testing and active testing. Now, during the passive testing, security researchers or testers try and understand the application's logic and try and explore the application. Just the basic exploration, trying to figure out the headers, parameters, cookie section, trying to gather the information. Or there are some pages which are which might be available over the internet. So just the passive scrubbing that happens. So in the active testing, we as a security researcher begin to use the methodology which are described in different sections, or the methodology that we have. Okay, this is a thing that can be used in testing. These are the things that should be used for testing. These are my test cases that I should be running, or I want to run on the applications. So could be configuration management, identifying if there are any configuration issues on the web application, or input validation testing, finding the if there are errors which have been handled properly, if there are any cryptography issues, business logic testing, client side testing, authentication, authorization testing, session management testing. So like the list is like endless, so we can go on and on. So this guide touches all those unsung areas. So the testing guide also describes in detail both the general testing framework and the techniques required to implement the framework in practice. Now, this can be taken as a framework, and it is basically a framework, but then you can build on top of it. Because when we start talking about web app pen testing, when we talk about DevOps with security, all those things need to have a framework. This can be taken into consideration, especially from the side wherein we do the offensive testing on our own application. There are multiple resources I'll talk about during the journey. Some would be on the defensive side. Okay, why this and why not the other one? So there are multiple chapters which are there. So chapter 3 presents like the OWASP testing framework and explains the whole techniques and task in relations to the different phases that we have as part of the SDLC. And chapter 4 actually, that's the one that covers how to test for specific vulnerabilities like SQL injections, code injection, and do other test cases. Now, I want to talk about that how this can be helpful. Think about, there's a form, and first we need to find a form in an application that is there. Once we've found the form, we need to submit that form. Now, once we submit the form, either we can do it by authenticated, or we don't have credentials for it. If the form doesn't allow the users who are not on the, who are unauthenticated, they'll just be removed from the whole cycle. Now, once they authenticate, what's the user ID? What's the session, whether the session is going to persist, the user is going to log in for a longer period of time, whether the data is being validated what the user has provided. If it's a registration form, then they might be providing all the relevant details like name, first name, last name, address, phone number, email address, so many other details being captured. And once the form is filled, is there any error that's coming as part of the whole process? Are there any error that's being printed on the user console or on the user browser? Now, if that's fine, how about the cryptography being used? Are we using a weak cryptography? And which is revealing some information, which is actually putting the application to in the hands of hackers or malicious users. Not the hackers, but yes, malicious actors or the people who don't have the right intent. Now, once that's there, the input might be reflecting back on the client screen. If it's a registration form, we will create the registration, and then there will be a profile that will be created. And once that's there, are there any client side issues? So if you've seen the whole life cycle, this cycle talks about the journey from finding the form till the client has all the details filled in, and if there are issues. So the guide talks about and or touches upon every area. So what are the details that it has? So it talks about information gathering, configuration and deployment management testing, identity management testing. If you've realized that the form flow that I was talking about, it's the same flow that we have here. Like, first of all, information gathering, whether the form exists or not. Then configuration and deployment management testing, whether what's the configuration, we've submitted the form. Finding the identities, filling in the username and password. Now, this is just a framework. We can use it however we want. It's not like that these test cases will be going in just one direction. We can tweak as per the need, as per the organization requirement. Now, if I have authenticated the user, authorize the user, I would know that okay, this is the identity. Then we will be persisting the session, we will be doing the input validation, we'll be checking the error handling or weak cryptography, then we'll be checking the client side issues. Now, there's one thing that we would also be doing is business logic testing, which we might skip which we might miss with the tools that we have. So it touches upon that area as well. Now, uh, when it touches upon all those areas, what is exactly inside it, what information it provides, I'm really curious about it. So it provides the summary about that particular test case, that how we can do the information gathering, then how to test it, how to figure out if there is an authentication issue, what are the tools that can be used to figure out those details. And there are some references, white papers, or there are blogs which are attached to it, so that you can go back on, okay, this is a use case that it was talking about. If I'm able to exploit, this is what happens to my application, or this is the risk that can be there for my application. Now, when we talk about information gathering, what exactly is information gathering, and what are we talking about here, and why do we even need it? So, what is information gathering? It's the act of gathering the different kind of information against the target that we want to figure out. So when it comes to getting a clear information or gathering concepts, the simplest way is to collect the information. If I want to test an application, the first thing that I would want to do is gather the information which is available. It's like a passive scan or passive information finding that I would want to do. So while it looks like a fun activity, but it can actually give it can give more information. It can give and can provide the information which people might not think that it'll be available over the internet. But it can be time consuming task as well, because you would have to do the whole reconnaissance part, and you would be finding information using different tool sets, different techniques. Could be Google docking, or can be much more detailed information, because like we might want to collect the information about the network, such as public or private information, associated domain names, network hosts, public and private IPs, blogs, routing tables, and so much information that we want to, or if the SSL certificates are expired or they're going to expire. So we might want to get those details, and not to miss the open ports. So we will be fingerprinting the details. We will do the banner grabbing. Those are the details that will be done as part of the information gathering. If you can see that these are the details specifically highlighted here one by one, how we can conduct the discovery or reconnaissance, how we can fingerprint the web server. Once we have fingerprinted, how we can enumerate the applications, uh, what are the entry points that we can get. Now, all of that, once we have it, we are going to map it and then exploit the web application. So, once we have figured out all the information, we have found that, okay, this particular application might be running on Apache web server or Nginx or IIS, because these are the details I've just found it by just by banner grabbing or fingerprinting. So now once I have it, I would want to test that whether are there any configuration related issues or not. So I'm going to be testing for that if there are any servers which are left for the public to see, or there are some configuration issues on those servers, if there are any application related issues, or if there are any issues which can give me information about the servers. So like HTTP methods, there are many methods which are there. So if any of the method that is available, like if there's a put method that is enabled, trace method which is enabled, or or options or put, all those enabled, or delete method is enabled, that can create a lot of issues for the application. How about there are a lot of things that I've been seeing in the past, that subdomain takeover. Because of all the configuration related issues, people were able to do the subdomain takeover. And how about cloud storage issues that we have seen in the past so many years, that there was one bucket which was left open, or just forgot to make it private, and all the data were lost, like the client's information, all the sensitive emails, all the data which was supposed to be private, that was left open. How about there were concerns with the backup? There were some files which were not referenced at all, like they were not categorized. They were supposed to be sensitive, but they were not categorized, so it was lying open, anybody could see it. So the configuration management, deployment testing, all of this talks about how we can test all those things which should be testing as part of the configuration management. Now, once we have tested the configuration related issues, what else we can test? Are there any low lying fruits, or when we check the application, what are the things that play very important role? Now, another important piece is identity management testing, like whether those identities exist in the organization or not. There are roles which we can define. I have seen a lot of concerns by not defining the roles. Like there is only one administrator, and then there are certain managers, there are certain staff members, but then all have the same access. Why? Can we categorize proper policies? Can we create proper rules for them? And With this, by this section, we can understand how we can test all of those things. Like if we have, let's say, two sets of credentials, we can log in as an administrator, we land into the admin page. How about when we log in with a normal user, we just have to modify the URL and change from user to admin, and we are logged in as an admin. Is there a concern? Obviously, because the identity is supposed to be a normal user identity, and suddenly we can see that um now the user can actually be an admin, whether the user was not supposed to have access to it. Now, how about there are certain concerns with the registration process itself? What could go wrong with the registration process? Can anyone register for the whole access to the environment, or is it lying open? If a person is registering, are we identifying whether it's a synthetic identity, or is there a concern with the user? What proof of identity is required for a registration to be successful? User might be creating like 10 identities as well as 100 identities from the same device. Are we trying to check that? Can the same person or identity register multiple times? Those can be really, really big concern. Or all those are bots. So these are the test cases which are available as part of identity management testing. Even account provisioning process, account enumeration, or guessable user accounts. Oh, that's like a big, big concern. That's why we have got like our own accounts with alphanumeric username and not so guessable username. Now I'll tell you something. If you have your email address from your organization, it could be what? First name dot last name at organization.com or abc.com, or it could be first name at organization.com. That could be it. Or we can also test for a non-existence username and then try and figure out what exactly we get. If there's a username which does not exist and we see that login failed because of the user invalid account, or there's a generic answer like there's a password that is incorrect. So if we get all such details and we get error codes which were not supposed to be shown to the user, that why they were not able to find the identities. Now, here are certain details that can be tested. And this is more towards, if we are a pen tester, what exactly we can find out, what exactly we need to test, especially when we are starting off, it's a big challenge. We can actually create test cases out of it. So I created my own test case list, that these are the things that I want to touch upon. These are the things that I want to test in an application. Now, authentication testing, not to miss authentication testing, testing for credentials which are transported over the encrypted channels, default credentials, weak lockout mechanism. Like somebody has got our username and now they're trying our passwords again and again. And how about using default credentials? I'll give you an example. Like it's not like so recent, but sometime back when I was working on one of the projects, not with my current company, and I wouldn't want to share about the company or the project details, but we were testing, we scanned the whole network and we found that there are some default credentials which exist. We looked through the IPs, we tried to access them, and we figured out that those are all the CCTV cameras credentials, CCTV cameras IPs, and which are using default credentials. We started scrubbing through the internet. Okay, we found like there are some 15, 20 default credentials that are there. And the testing guy says, okay, these could be like the generic um, default credentials that we can throw. After fifth or sixth, I remember that we could get into the cameras. Oh, if somebody external user get into those cameras, what could go wrong? It's beyond imaginable. And how about bypassing the authentication schema? It's like, how can that go wrong? People are still following that and people are still able to breach the authentication schema. And If you click on remember password, it'll be there for ages, and those vulnerable remember password can be like big issue. And browser caches weakness, wherein if we don't use client side hashing, the browser will be caching it. And if it's a Windows system, I will use WinHex editor and try and fetch the password. I've done it with one of the big website, and we could see the password in the clear text. How about weak security passwords or questions? Or mother's maiden name, who's my best friend, what's my date of birth? Is it difficult to find? We all are on social media, and finding all of those details is like super easy. And breaching it in the organization, it's again become more easier. So, uh, authentication testing, all those test cases which we might forget, but the testing guide provides step by step things. Okay, you might miss this. Can you check it? Or you might want to look at it. Or if you've not touched upon that area, how about touching that area? Apart from that, once we've tested the authentication, like all those weak passwords, the reset functionalities, because I have seen that there are a lot of concerns with reset password reset functionalities as well. And how about checking whether the authorization is proper or not in the application? Have you heard about directory traversal uh, pathways or file include? I've done in the past, and it was super easy to do it because there was no proper authorization which was there. I was able to bypass the authorization schema. I was able to because there were no proper authorization mechanism. I was able to escalate the privileges. And how much time it takes a malicious actor to get into your network via phishing emails or maybe any other mechanism, and then escalate the privileges if we don't have proper authorization mechanism in place. And there have been vulnerabilities like insecure direct object reference and many more. So how do we test it? Are there ways which are available? Absolutely. So testing guide gives the details which we can keep it. We can understand that how we can do the URL traversal, what all information it can give me, or when we are checking for weak session IDs, it can give me those details. So here are the authenticate authorization testing details. What we can now, this is, as I said, a base level, a framework which we can pick up and take it forward. We can build our own test cases with it, but it provides good information scenarios, because we need to have scenarios. Every test case might not apply to all the applications, but based on our understanding about the application, there are certain test cases which will apply for sure. Now, what to do in those areas? What are the tools to use? What are the open source tools that to use, that it can help? Now, on top of it, session management testing, I said. Now, what are the testing areas that I can touch upon? Session management schema, whether after the logout, the session persists or not, whether the session variables are exposed over the internet or not. Everybody can see that these are the session variables, and if I able to manipulate, I would be able to get into anyone's session. Cookie attributes. Am I revealing any details in cookies? Or those cookies are like, I can manipulate them. If there are 10 cookies or 15 cookies or some random cookies that are coming in, and after a while the same cookie comes in, and I don't have a secure random cookie, I am in big trouble. So can I test it? How about session timeout? I have seen all those issues wherein the timeout was not proper. Especially if we have banking applications, we need to have session timeout after, like, let's say 4 or 5 minutes of inactivity if we are not touching the application, or if we are not traversing the applications or accessing it. So session management testing provides the whole list of test cases that we can perform, all the information about how to test. Like, are all the set cookies directive tagged as secure? Are those secure properly, or are the cookies being generated secure randomly? And can the cookie be forced over unencrypted transport? Like if I have a session over HTTPS, can I force this over HTTP? Also, are there any cookies which are persistent? What is the expiry time? Are cookies that are expected to be configured in a certain way? What is the cache control? Where exactly, how exactly the cookies are being collected? How many cookies are being used by the application? So it's in one of my testing experience previously, where I found that application had so many concerns with the session. If I log out, click the back button, I was still able to log into the application. The cookie changes after like if I log out, the cookie changes, but then after 10 or 15 attempts, the same cookie is in use. I can force the application to use the cookie pattern, because I realized this is the pattern. Okay, if I force the cookie certain way, I would be able to access certain user or some user if the user is authenticated. And the testing guide also explains that which part of the application requires this cookie in order to be accessed and utilized. So we can get a brief idea, okay, this is how it could be. And if there's a cookie which is being encoded or encrypted, can I go ahead and find the value for that cookie? If it's a base 64 cookie, I would be able to find out easily. Let me open Burp Suite and I will be able to figure out, okay, let's do the reverse engineering and like, let's just reverse it and figure out what's the cookie value. And can I manipulate it, and can I pass it on, or can I pass on the tokens, or can I manipulate the tokens? Now, once I'm able to get to the application, how about application testing? Application being tested for the valid inputs. Whatever input as a user I am providing to the application, will it being like is it being checked properly? Now, moving on to the input validation. Here, under that, what are the things that can be tested? Could be reflected cross-site scripting. Cross-site scripting. There are stored cross-site scripting. Could be for SQL injection in multiple ways. LDAP injection, whether I'm able to perform XML injection, XPath injection, XXC I am able to perform. So all these tests, how can I perform? Now I know these vulnerabilities exist. These are the high findings. These are the top 10 bugs. But how to test them? Are there any use cases which can help me understand, if I do this, this is going to happen? And this should be the result. This could be the result. So all those test cases, we can figure it out from here, especially around command injection. I have seen a lot of cases wherein command injection provided like had been like a gold mine for me. And I could provide some special characters and I could fetch the details. I could leverage the dangerous APIs, which were exposing all the details. Now, once we have it, once we've tested that there are some concerns with input validation, how about checking for some errors? Are we getting some errors? Now, these are the things that I've talked about. Now, in the error handling, could be the details about the error codes, because there are certain codes, error codes that are part of the application that are being displayed to the user. If you've heard about HTTP 404 not found, often this error comes or provide details that there is some problem with the web server, or with the components associated with it, or the the details are not there at all. So there are certain more errors, like error 500 or 400 bad requests, and there are 200 okay, like everything is fine. But how about when we are testing for these error, I am able to get details about application server, or what database the application is running, like has, if it's error related to MySQL, and I get, okay, there is some problem with MySQL. And I'm sure you must have all seen those errors, wherein when we are testing for especially SQL injection or some injection, those errors seem to come up on the screen. There's some stack trace error, and that gives us information about the backend. Now, by manipulating all those variables that are passed to the database, we can figure out, okay, we can get access to this database as well. So the errors can be like a gold mine. How about ge- uh, having certain set of like generic errors rather than providing those errors, so we can test for error handling as well, and checking for stack traces. Still the errors are not being handled properly in some of the applications, and all the information is being displayed on the user screen, and that can be leveraged for the further testing. And if I know, okay, this is the server which is running on the application by bannergramming, and this is the database, how about I craft certain attack vectors or commands which are specifically for that particular database. Might work if that the database is vulnerable, if we don't have proper measures taken. Then once the errors are being tested properly, how about testing for weak cryptography? Now, how we can do that? We can check for weak SSL certificates, which might be available now. Most of the applications have started supporting 1.3, TLS version 1.3, but there are certain applications which still use the older versions. So when we have SSL TLS in present, because we have to have it, why not have proper certificates, or the server is using TLS, the latest versions, and we keep a check on the certificate validity. Sometimes we miss to check and the certificates get expired, and the user gets an error. Okay, there is some problem with the certificate error. How about I try and play around with the application? Also, I think when we start testing for HTTPS, or I feel that the application or the content that should be for HTTPS or for the authenticated user, that shouldn't be available for over HTTP. And now when there is a ranking which is available for the applications which don't use HTTPS, now people are forced to have HTTPS enabled, and presence of mixed content in the same page can actually lead to leak of information, especially sensitive data. And if we have weak SSL or TLS versions, oh, we have known that there are lot of vulnerabilities which are available to, which can be exploited, like padding oracle vulnerability, and we can manipulate the data, we can sniff the data, and the information being transferred over unencrypted channels. Now all those testing mechanisms are there. What else could go wrong? What information I can find? There is something called business logic testing, which uh, which we can't find it with tools, or the tools might not be able to provide it in a right way. So how to test those, especially for testing the business logic for data validation or force request, or trying to just process the proper timing? Or I have seen that blind SQL injection exists because I could provide the delay query, time delay query, and I delayed the process of registration of users for like a longer time, for 10 minutes. So if for example, there's an e-commerce site which allow users to select item to put it into the cart, and when you go to the summary page, it provides the sale items. How about, as a malicious user, I was able to find that there is a summary page and all the valid sessions are being maintained, and I can manipulate the session. So I remember one of my friend, so the person was trying to book a ticket for a movie, and the price was quite high, and the person didn't want to do it, like pay that much. How about I manipulate the parameters and able to get the price list, or get the movie tickets for cheap? Can I do that? I can play around with business logic and see if there are proper validation mechanisms at the server side or not, and I
There's
could
a
try.
question in the chat if you want me to ask you. How to find a random IP attack?
So I'll answer all those questions. So because let me finish it and then I can answer all those questions. Is that okay?
Yep, cool.
Perfect. I'm almost done. Like it's just a touch upon that I wanted to do, and how we can use this uh, guide. So now, what if a user was able to start a transaction which is specifically linked to a particular account, which could be providing memberships, or which could be providing some extra mileage? So how we um how we can test it? There are tools which are available which can help finding those, like OWASP, ZAP, which is Desert Attack Proxy, Bob Proxy, and many other tools which are available in the market. But I try and root for the tools which are available open source and which we can leverage. And there are tools which are available as plugins. Like for one of the clients which I was testing, like a while ago, they said that you can't have any tool in the like in the project. Okay, so what should we do? Is there anything that we can use? How about using Firefox plugins? There are so many good Firefox plugins and Chrome plugins that can help us in finding all of these details. We can try and test for cookies. We can try and test for the business logic testing and many more details. And now, when we are testing for business logic, there are many things that comes as part of it which we can test, like testing against the defenses which are already there for application misuse, playing around with client side functionality, playing around with the server side functionality, like especially with session management. And if there are any unexpected files which can give me a lot of details, like a gold mine. So those details. And apart from that, once I have tested, how about testing for client side attacks, like testing for DOM-based cross-site scripting, HTML injection, cross-origin resource sharing, and client jacking, we've been hearing lately, and cross-site script inclusion. Like there are so many things, but how to test them? So the guide gives you step-by-step instruction that this is how it can be done, and what are the tools of trade. So I've mentioned only OWASP Zap, but there are like n number of tools that can be used. And there are certain tools which are like necessity that we should have. So OWASP, Zap, Burp Suite, these are the tools we should have because it can help us finding the gold mine. But then there are certain tools which are specifically for finding a certain vulnerabilities, like WP Scan and finding for WordPress vulnerabilities. But then there are certain plugins which can be only used for certain purpose. Now, once we have found the vulnerability, and then we need to report it. So how we can report it can be integrated with the defect dojo or any platform that can be available. uh, and that's about the testing guide. You can reach me here